Welcome to Love Factually, the podcast that analyzes rom-coms and romantic films using the science of close relationships. We're your hosts, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel. Eli, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about Moonstruck, the 1987 Italian-American love story featuring Cher, a surprisingly hot Nicolas Cage, and his wooden hand. The film won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Some of the themes we'll explore are whether partners in love drive each other crazy, how people navigate breakups, and if the fear of death causes men to chase women.
And fair warning, we'll be spoiling this movie today. So if you've ever twice taken the Lord's name in vain, once slept with the brother of your fiancé, and once bounced a check at the liquor store, but that really was an accident, then go ahead and watch this movie and come back. So Eli, who are the key characters and couples in this movie?
What was that middle one, Loretta?
Yeah, right. Can you go back to that one?
Yeah, well, I think you missed one. The protagonist of Moonstruck is Loretta Castorini, a 37-year-old widowed bookkeeper who lives with her parents in Brooklyn. Played by Cher in an Oscar-winning performance, Loretta is superstitious, smart, and no-nonsense. Her mother is Rose, played with Oscar-winning verve by Olympia Dukakis. She is wise, candid, and skeptical of romantic love. Cosmo is Rose's outspoken and unfaithful husband. Loretta has two romantic interests in the film. Johnny Camerari is gentle, traditional, and buffoonish. He's played by a 54-year-old Danny Aiello. His brother Ronnie is brooding, self-indulgent, and entirely unhinged. He's played by a 23-year-old Nicolas Cage.
That's wild.
31 years or whatever. It works.
Okay.
Among the other characters are a middle-aged professor named Perry who keeps getting dumped by his collegiate girlfriends and an older woman named Mona who's having an affair with Cosmo. So, Paul, those are the chess pieces. Are you ready to give us 1 minute on how the film moves them across the board?
Okay, I'm ready. This is
all right, hit it.
Quite a plot.
There's a lot, dude. A lot. Good luck. On your mark. Get set. Go.
Loretta Castorini is a 37-year-old Italian-American widow in Brooklyn. She agrees to marry her mild-mannered boyfriend Johnny as he heads to Sicily to visit his dying grandmother. While he's away, Johnny asks Loretta to invite his estranged younger brother Ronnie to the wedding. Their estrangement, we discover, is due to a bread-slicing accident that Ronnie blames on Johnny and that caused Ronnie to lose his hand and his fiancée. Loretta challenges Ronnie's story about what happened, sparks fly, and they end up having sex. Loretta feels guilty. Ronnie professes his love and says he'll leave her alone if she accompanies him to one night at the opera. Loretta agrees. She gets her hair done in the best 80s way possible. They go to see La Boheme and are deeply moved by it. They encounter Loretta's father Cosmo there with his mistress, and while all this is happening, her mother Rose has dinner, but not an affair, with the college professor having a crisis of confidence. Loretta and Ronnie sleep together again. Johnny returns sooner than expected, and in the final scene in the family kitchen, Rose demands that Cosmo stop seeing his mistress. Johnny breaks off the engagement because his mother is gonna live or something. Loretta throws the ring at him, and then Ronnie proposes to Loretta with the same ring. Pop the champagne. Everybody is very happy with how this turned out.
Maybe 0.8 seconds over, but look, frankly, that last scene could have been a whole minute summary by itself.
I know.
I think you basically got it.
There's a lot going on in there. So, Eli, what is your relationship to this movie?
You know, I haven't had one historically, and it's interesting because this is the oldest movie we've done on the show.
Right.
We've done. I think When Harry Met Sally was 89.
Yeah.
I think Pretty Woman was 90. Now we're back to late 87, and I'm 12 years old.
Yeah,
right? So I was not seeing Moonstruck. This wasn't part of my sort of upbringing. One of the things that I found really intriguing about revisiting this movie is I'm trying to wrap my head around my feelings about Nicolas Cage.
I definitely have feelings. I have feelings about something that's happening.
They are everywhere. My feelings are all over, and it might be due to the moon. I'm not sure, but he is gorgeous in this movie. I had sort of forgotten how just gorgeous and sexy Nicolas Cage was in this era, and he is so ridiculously over the top in his performances, many of his performances, but this one, and I keep wanting to hate what he's doing because my frontal lobes are telling me this is not good acting, this is ridiculous, but he is so compelling to watch. And so I think a lot of
there's just not,
he is
nothing like him.
Yeah, like my feelings about the movie are sort of tied up in that. The other thing is I sort of did a deep dive on Cher.
Yeah.
Again, she's just been a part of my, background my entire life. She's been big since, 10 years before I was born at least. And, as a fun fact I discovered, she is the only solo artist with #1 singles on the U.S. Billboard charts in 7 consecutive decades, from the 60s up to the 2020s. So kudos to her.
Wild. So I too was very young when this movie came out. I would have been 8. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not Italian American, but my late stepmother was. Her whole family is Italian. Yeah, Marie, right. Whole family Italian American. And in that family, emotions can be very big. The drama can be very big. And so there's a lot in here that feels very familiar to me. And I actually double-checked this with my dad, because there is a particular phrase in this movie that was a staple in my household, and I'm just going to play it right here.
Snap out of it!
So that,
perfect. Yeah.
That was said very often in my house growing up as a consequence of this movie. This exact phrase. That basically my stepmother saw this movie and was like, that's my catchphrase. It's mine. I'm using it from now on. So
it's perfect.
It's pretty special in that way. So let's talk about what this movie gets right about close relationships. There's a lot happening. Some parts of it I don't think are meant to be real or realistic, or they seem a little fantastical.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So it's a little tricky to try to figure out exactly what the movie is saying. But why don't you kick us off here? What do you got?
Let me start with sort of a secondary scene.
Okay.
There's a lot of secondary scenes involving tertiary characters.
And those scenes are often very good.
Yes, I agree. Some are hit and some are miss. And I still don't understand exactly what the point of the woman who threatened that she was bombing the plane is. Like, there's a lot going on that I'm like, and I don't really know what the purpose of like Cosmo's dad is. But yes, there's a lot happening.
Like just
some
characters.
Of it is very,
but I mean, just to interject, that's a little bit like my childhood was just filled with like, who are these characters?
Oh,
who is
interesting.
That? How are they related? I'm confused. But I mean, not a guy with 5 dogs or a woman threatening to blow up a plane, but characters. Anyway, continue.
I love it. Yeah. So you certainly get your share of that. So one of the scenes in this movie that is certainly not one of the most famous scenes is one of my favorites, at least in terms of illustrating something true about how relationships work. So there's a scene where Loretta is going to buy some champagne, and she buys it from one of these like local places. Again, I don't know how common these things are anymore, but one of these local Brooklyn places, mom and pop sort of thing, middle-aged or older couple. And the wife is trying to pick a fight with the husband. And this is Lotta and Irv. And she says,
I seen a wolf in everybody I ever met, and I see a wolf in you.
Mm-hmm. That makes 20. Thanks. Have a nice night.
You too.
You know what I see in you, Lottie?
What?
The girl I married.
Oh, come on.
Good night.
Good night.
It's such good diffusion.
It melts her heart. Yes, but the reason why I love that as much as I do is because I don't know the exact numbers, but my guess is the large proportion of the fights that people have are mostly not about the substance or content of the fight.
Right.
They are about something deeper. And so when she says, I've seen the way you look at that other woman and it isn't right and you're a wolf, she's trying to pick a fight with him. But really what she's saying is, I'm feeling insecure and I want to know you love me. Yeah. And he did something really difficult. We've talked about negative reciprocity on this show. It's one of the key ideas in relationship science. When your partner is needling you and picking a fight with you, it's really hard not to get sucked in and defensive. But what he realized is, this is my wife and I love her and she's feeling insecure and I can deal with the underlying problem in a single line, fight over. It was a near perfect demonstration of how somebody might handle it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we call that repairing the interaction, but it's like maybe one of the single best pairs I've ever seen delivered in this tight, compressed period of time. So that guy is doing well in relationships.
He nailed it because she just what she was really saying when she was like, "I don't like you. Look at her. You're a wolf." Which really what she was saying is, "Do you still love me?" And he understood that, and he told her, "I still love you." And the way he did it is, "You're still the girl I loved all those years ago."
So there's a lot of discussion about wolves in this movie. Well, a lot of wolves doing a lot of things. And one thing wolves apparently do is chew off their hands to get out of a bad relationship. I think that's how the metaphor works. And that gets at some of the interesting angles that this movie has on breaking up. And I think highlights how tricky it is to break up with people, or the various reasons people had to break up with people. But I want to focus on at least the Ronnie character's narrative about what happened. His narrative is he lost his hand and his fiance left him. And Loretta challenges him and basically accuses him of wanting to get out of that relationship, but not knowing how to do it without some act of self-sabotage. And again, I don't know how much of this is supposed to be like operatic and fantastical or literal, but I'm not so worried about that right now. Just the general idea that people find it challenging to break off relationships that they kind of don't want. There's a lot of work on this. And indeed, people very commonly stay in relationships that they find unfulfilling or unsatisfying because they don't want to hurt their partner. In other words, breaking up with somebody is a really, really unpleasant thing. Some of Sam Joel's work on the progression bias gets at this, where she shows like all of these different ways that people are motivated to make their relationships continue. And that can even be true as people are contemplating breakup. That is, they will spend all this time reviewing and reconsidering the evidence that they should stay together rather than break up capriciously. And I think that's at least what Loretta is accusing Ronnie of doing.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I absolutely caught that in the movie. I think because this was all tied up in Nick Cage's Cageness, that like my eyes were the size of saucers and my jaw was on the ground. So I didn't like link it back to the research literature, but it is an interesting idea that sometimes we want to break up, but we don't want to hurt the other person, or we don't want to feel like the bad guy, or for whatever reason, we're like, want a way out. But the apparently simple way out of saying, I am breaking up with you, we need to be done, feels unavailable to us.
Yeah.
And so we provoke a fight or something like that. I mean, this is a very, very extreme example, like maiming himself and then apparently turning into a maniac.
Hiding in a basement for 5 years, baking bread.
Literally,
But I think a lot of movies accidentally or intentionally imply that breaking up is actually the easy part. The hard part is, coming to the realization that you want it to end. That's where the tension in most movies is when somebody's going to get broken up with. It's how do you get to that point? I think in real life, yes, that can be a slow process getting to that point, but then the actual act of breaking it off can be very drawn out and very painful, and people want to find ways not to do it. I also think we'll spend more time on the last scene later, which is amazing, but also what is happening. But I think there's some wish fulfillment in that scene because Loretta feels herself drawn to Ronnie, and then luck from the sky. What do you know? Johnny's going to break it off with her. And so I think there's a little bit of that going on too. It's like when you want a relationship to end, you would like somebody else to do it for you, please.
Yeah, the cosmic gods or a bread slicer, I suppose.
Bread slicer. I'm not going to go near one of those anytime soon.
No,
what do you have? And what else do you have in this category?
I have a couple smaller ones. I'll throw them both out to you here. So one thing that I quite liked about the movie is, so again, he has a severely injured hand, basically cut off his hand more or less. And so he has a wooden hand substitute. And one thing that I liked is once this is Ronnie, of course, is very deeply in love with Loretta, which seems to happen very, very quickly. When he's reaching out to her to say, please come up to my room. I mean, usually he's saying, "Get in my bed," but
That was great.
He's basically inviting.
That was a good impression.
It is.
You should do more of those. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I've been working on that all day. So he reaches out to her, and he reaches out to her with his maimed hand, and I liked that as a sort of a metaphor of when relationships are getting more intimate, and we're really willing to go all in and take a risk, which he definitely is. I mean, he is all in.
He's very
on her.
open and very vulnerable, kind of throughout.
Exactly.
I mean, kind of from the jump.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are exactly right. And I mean, he's like, he's just one exposed nerve right from the start. But he's very in love with her, and he might think like, well, I could be more elegant if I reached out with my non-maimed hand, but why don't I reach out with my injured hand? And I liked that idea of reaching out with my vulnerability and saying,
that's
please.
good. What was the other one?
The second one is, I don't think the movie really nails this, but I want to give credit insofar as the movie makes an attempt to nail it. So I do think that the movie is playing with something around the space of a tension in romantic life and in marriage between, on the one hand, stability or like the responsible choice, and on the other hand, like passion and maybe even irresponsible choices. And so they do this a couple different ways. To some degree, Loretta's parents show some of these characteristics, but certainly you're supposed to get the sense that Johnny, the Danny Aiello character, who's 193 years old, he's the one who's like the sane, responsible choice. And then there's the Nicolas Cage character, who's, I mean, literally he's 23 at the time, and Aiello is 54, and he's the one that's like just unhinged and irresponsible. And Loretta knows, like, this is crazy. And he himself is saying, this is crazy. This is the way it should be. Insane and irresponsible. And I think, even though I think the movie doesn't quite get it right, there is a real tension that we face in trying to get those two things that we really love. When we see her early with Johnny, the Danny Aiello one, the first thing she says is like, well, here's some, you shouldn't eat the fish because you'll have an upset tummy on the plane. And that's the sort of caring stuff. And then there's this crazy passion with Ronnie. And so you're getting it split into two people. She has to choose between the two. Is that really the way life works? No. But is there some sort of tension or trade-off? I think so.
Well, when I talk about this kind of trade-off, these trade-offs come up a lot in the literature. Yeah. And I think that trade-off is clearest if you think about one relationship over time. And so I think, I don't know what the history is of Loretta and Johnny's relationship, but it would commonly be the case that what you have at the beginning of the relationship is something approximating the Nicolas Cage mania, and then gradually that evolves into the sort of caring, thinking about, what your stomach's going to be like on the plane relationship that she has with Johnny. I do think the movie splitting it into two people here, I don't love that as much, because I think this distinction works much better as a description of a relationship than a description of two different kinds of people. Yeah,
that's a good point.
But the fact that it's here and they're playing with it in different ways, and of course the relationship lengths are different in terms of what we're seeing. So I'm with you there. Yeah. So one other interesting thing, we've sort of marveled at the age differences between the two brothers in this movie, but there's a lot of interesting stuff happening here with age. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the Perry-Rose relationship. Even though that's a very brief relationship, they have dinner together and have a stroll together and have these conversations.
Yeah, this is the professor who keeps getting water thrown in his face by college-age women that he's dating but then insulting on their dates. Yeah. So it's a strange beginning.
Yes, exactly. And part of the discussion that they have is, why do you chase these younger women? And he finds himself drawn to Rose, who is older than he is. And what I think this is capturing nicely is the idea that often our ideas about the age of a partner that we're looking for don't always translate into the concrete reality of what it's like to be sitting there talking with these people, having conversations with them, trying to build connections with them. Now, he's meeting these girls in his classes. I'm sure we're going to get to this in a later segment. what we think about that. But he's dating these women that he's meeting in his classes. And that seems appealing in the abstract. And then he goes on these dates, and these dates go terribly. So we have some data looking at the distinction between the ages of partners that people say they're going for versus what appeals to them in the moment when they go on actual dates. And we found some fascinating things, right? So one of the things we found is that people will articulate these thresholds, and this is with a blind date matchmaking company. So they're setting people up on these blind dates, and they tell their matchmakers ahead of time, do not set me up with anybody over the age of 40. Please, no. And yet, and sometimes the matchmakers do anyway. It turns out those thresholds, they mean absolutely nothing. They don't affect how you felt on the date at all. They're just meaningless, whatever thresholds you came up with ahead of time.
Right. So if I say, don't set me up with somebody older than 40, and you set me up with somebody who's 38 versus 43, the fact that one's on one side of a threshold and the other's on the other side of that same threshold is almost meaningless in explaining my interest.
That's right. And if I compare you to, say, somebody who said, my threshold is 48, so either one goes, that's fine. It wouldn't have made any difference.
Same thing.
So I think that in those scenes with Perry, the movie is getting at some of these ideas. Like, you may think these much younger women are quite appealing, but, what you find appealing in the moment actually could end up being something quite different. And today, like with online dating, when people can shape their pools however they want, I think people can very easily fall into these traps where they craft their pools very narrowly to have a certain set of people in a certain range of ages, and then they go on these dates and they're like, why am I getting water thrown in my face?
Yeah, you're right. The movie is doing something interesting because it definitely paints Perry as sort of a stereotype, as one of these like sad sack middle-aged guys who doesn't have it anymore, but he can still maybe impress his, the undergraduate women in his class, and that's what he's really into. But then happenstance gets him across the table from Rose. And apparently she is older than he is, and yet they have interesting conversation, and he's totally interested in her too. So the question is it weird? Like, is this a misperception of how attraction tends to work? Well, the exact study has not been conducted, but the work that exists suggests that no, like, he should be able to, even though he usually goes for 20-year-olds, he should be able to sit across the table from a 55 or 60-year-old. And if the chemistry is good, enjoy that just as much. I think the film does get that just about right.
Well, okay. We've found a lot of moments in here that we thought conveyed some accurate things about relationships. But I wonder if you have any misconceptions you'd like to discuss about relationships.
You might be leading the witness again. So I'll talk about a few things. Why don't I sort of start basic? One of the things I actually found really interesting and thought-provoking about the movie was Rose's reactions to the idea that her daughter, Loretta, the main character in the movie, might be in love with her partner. So early on, she's talking about Johnny, and she says to Loretta, do you love him, Loretta? And Loretta says, no. And Rose says, and it's quite interesting, good, when you love them, they drive you crazy because they know they can. Yeah. And this comes up again later. Now Loretta's with Ronnie in the closing moments of the film, and Rose says again, do you love him, Loretta? And Loretta says, yeah, Ma, I love him awful. And Rose says, oh God, that's too bad. And I find this interesting because I think it's both sort of a really good insight, and then it gets something deeply wrong. So she's correct in the idea that when we love someone, they have power over us. Right. It's not the typical way that social scientists or political commentators think about power, but in an intimate context, to the degree that I really love you, that there's nobody who could ever replace you, you very literally have power over me. You could treat me in a bunch of bad ways, and I would probably hang around because of how much I love you and how much I need you. The thing that Rose misses when she says, when you love them, they drive you crazy because they know they can. She's correct that when you love them, they can drive you crazy. She's wrong that that's what they do. That is, she's wrong that they will drive you crazy? Because
Yeah.
in most of these cases, they love you back.
Right. They don't want to drive you crazy.
Yes.
Right. They're motivated to not.
It's missing something profound to act as if because your partner can hurt you or drive you crazy, they will. That's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And that is a little bit of a tangled message that the film has. And I think relationship science captures those ideas pretty well. Let's talk about the men as wolves, and are they afraid of death? So let's just start with the basic idea. Do men chase women? Do they have affairs? Do they pursue sex because they are afraid of death? Now, first, there are a lot of discussions of this topic in the film, and lots of people have lots of different theories. It was fascinating to me that this is really before the heyday of evolutionary psychology in the public consciousness.
Interesting.
And that sort of explanation didn't really come up. I just thought that was interesting. A little bit of a window on the path. Not that people had never thought of those evolved ideas that, parental investment, so men don't have to invest as much, so they can afford to be more capricious with sexual opportunities. This idea has been dominant in the science for 30 plus years. But I thought it was interesting that nobody seemed to have that theory. But they did have a theory that we, psychologists, would call terror management.
That is exactly what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
That when you are afraid of death, you do things to stave off that fear of death, find meaning, etc. So, Eli, you may or may not be surprised to know that in the gigantic literature on terror management, there are some studies that look at whether priming men with a fear of death leads them to chase women in various forms.
Wow, there's direct tests of this hypothesis.
Yes. Now, so the terror management literature is interesting. It came of age during a time in the field of social psychology where we tended to run studies that had very small sample sizes. And what that sometimes meant is that you could find somewhat surprising evidence for claims that went in a wide variety of different directions. And then it was left up to the later researchers to put all these pieces together. And what is so fascinating about this case is that it didn't take long for me to find one study finding that primes of death lead men to be less interested in sex, and another study showing that primes led them to be more interested in sex.
Oh, interesting.
So we got effects going in the opposite direction of the thesis of the movie and in the same direction as the thesis of the movie. So that's always a challenge when it comes to science, when you run small studies and then get effects going in all these different directions. How do you put these pieces together?
Yeah, it's vexing when the studies in the literature go in divergent directions. It's not clear, one of these is right, the other is wrong, or under some circumstances, death has this effect, and on the other, it has these other effects. One of the things that I found interesting about the movie is, you're right, there's several different hypotheses about why men, I don't know why the focus is always on men. I guess it's because Rose is the one who's always asking the question.
Right.
But why do they chase women? Why do they have affairs? And one thing that was kind of interesting is very late in the movie, Rose says to her husband, Cosmo, I want you to quit seeing her, right? She's confronting Cosmo about his affair and saying, And Cosmo is sort of self-effacing in response, not taking responsibility, but he says, a man understands one day that his life is built on nothing, and that's a bad, crazy day. It's brutal. I actually do want to come back to this, but with regard to the sort of explanation or excuse for infidelity, this is a different story, right? This isn't a story, at least it's not exactly a story about mortality and death. It's more a story about meaning in life.
Yeah, okay.
And there is work. I mean, I actually find the most compelling work by Esther Perel, and this is in the clinical space rather than in the scientific space. But, a lot of the reason why people have affairs is that they feel like their life doesn't have enough meaning or excitement or purpose, and it's not intended to be a cut or a criticism of the current circumstance, the current relationship, and so forth, but they need it to feel a sense of meaning and aliveness. This is, again, not an excuse for having an affair, but part of the prediction of when people have affairs and the explanation that they tell themselves about why they're having an affair. For what it's worth, I found this more compelling than the fear of death explanation as I was watching the movie.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, that's why I kind of decided to put this topic in the misconception segment, is because, look, it seems unlikely that fear of death has very large effects driving men to chase women. And the loss of meaning thing, I agree, is a more credible take. Then we get the missing rib explanation. So,
oh boy.
So all right. So men are looking for the part of them that's been taken and is elsewhere. Okay.
It was Eve's fault.
Right. It was always Eve's fault. There is work suggesting that men have worse social networks than women. That explanation is certainly a credible way of thinking about some of these gender differences. That when men lack intimacy in other corners of their lives, they try to get it most fiercely in their current relationships. And maybe if that's faltering, then they try to search for it elsewhere. In my view, this is a very recent sort of scientific take. But this is the first challenge in 30 years to some of the evolutionary ideas about why it seems that men have a stronger sex drive, pursue more sex partners than women. And this explanation covers the whole range. It covers everything. It covers breakup. Why don't men want to break up? Why do men, feel that their partner is more irreplaceable, et cetera, et cetera? I'm not equating that with the missing rib, to be clear, but that there is something that men lack that they have to go find elsewhere. That's an interesting idea to consider.
It is an interesting idea. So to the degree that there are gendered motivations for having an affair, is that men are more likely to do it for some reasons than women are, let's say. One of those reasons you're suggesting is that men have thinner emotional social networks, and one of the ways that they can build an additional social connection is through an extra relationship sort of affair. And if I'm hearing you correctly, the argument is women surely can do that too, but the need isn't quite as great because women have more robust social networks.
This is a new idea that is out there that I find
intriguing.
Plausible.
So one thing that we blew past a little quickly is that devastating thing that Cosmo said when he said a man understands one day that his life is built on nothing, and that's a bad, crazy day. How do I think that would land in a marriage of several decades? I don't know what the right metaphor is, but somewhere between devastation and rage, I think, would be the response. And the way Rose responds, because she's superhuman, is she says, your life is not built on nothing, te amo. And, I love you in Italian. And he basically is like, oh, good point, I love you too. And that seems to be the way this ends. I don't buy it. What he said is far too devastating for her just to take it and say, you're wrong and I love you. And he's like, oh, good point. I guess everything's fine.
I think that's one of the things that's so confusing about this movie. Sometimes the emotions are so big and outsized, and sometimes it's like, what?
Massive.
But they just said this horribly devastating thing and you're not reacting.
Yeah, it's like not important enough to the plot, so we're just going to go past it.
Okay. The scene at the end, the last scene, around the kitchen table. It's masterful. I get it. I mean, I do think it is one of the most memorable things from this movie. And the way that it builds the tension, it's theatrical. It's great. I don't think affairs end like this. I don't think engagements don't end like this. I mean, it's like kind of obvious, but like an affair doesn't usually end with one request and then a slam on the table and then okay. And then also the broken engagement is so convenient, and then Ronnie's right there, and then but Johnny like seems like kind of happy for them, but also confused. It's a very it's funny, but I just obviously there are lots of things here that have no basis in reality.
I'm bewildered.
I'm laughing throughout the whole thing. It's funny, but
it's something. So just because not everybody's seen it as recently, yes, there's this, like, all the plot threads come together at the kitchen table. It is masterful in its way, and it is beautifully staged. I think this is the direction Jewison sort of is doing some of his best work in this scene. But the actual substance, so again, just so everyone remembers what we're talking about here, the table slamming is Rose, this is of course Loretta's mom, says to Cosmo, Loretta's dad, I need you to stop seeing her. And he's been this like hyper-masculine kind of jerk the whole movie. He stands up, he slams the table, he then sits back down and says, okay. And I don't really get it. I do. It's not that I can't understand what might be intended here, that like he's letting go of his, his angry masculine needs. But okay, that's one. And then the other one is, there's this affair that Loretta and Ronnie are having behind Johnny's back. This is, of course, Ronnie's brother. And then, it's like Johnny comes back and they're going to have this awkward interaction. But instead he says, oh, because I'm superstitious, we can't get married anyway. Yeah, right. And then they're all happily ever after. This is ridiculous. So and it's Deus Ex Machina, right? It's one of the worst examples I've seen.
My mother's gonna live. Out
of nowhere. And then Deus Ex Machina, the idea being basically like, well, then some like totally random thing comes from the gods and that resolves all the plot problems. I mean, it's a bad example of this. But it's important to remember the magnitude of the transgression that Loretta and Ronnie have against Johnny. And when Loretta and Ronnie are having sex, they know full well that they're transgressing against Johnny. Like it's too brutal even to play the clip. But she basically is saying, you're mad at him, take it out on me, like hollow me out so there's nothing left for him.
Yeah.
And Ronnie's like, yep, sounds good.
Yeah.
And that is in the spectrum of transgressions that people might commit in their personal lives. The way this woman is treating her fiance and this man is treating his brother seems about as bad as it gets. And it's kind of wild that at the end, it's just all fine.
And I think that's the thing is you could imagine building some real drama around that and, showing the real interpersonal consequences, but like because his mom is dying or something.
Yep,
we don't get that. Right. I did look this up, and I found this great paper that I kind of been forgotten. That looked at, are people more upset if their partner cheats on them with a relative or a non-relative? Because you can make a pretty straightforward case from like kin selection ideas and evolutionary psychology that, well, if you're keeping it in the family,
oh my God,
you share genes, and so maybe you wouldn't be as upset. You'd still be upset.
It's not a big deal because my brother and I share genes, so like go ahead. So, does that seem not intuitive.
Well, and in fact, they did not find support for that hypothesis. If anything, they found the opposite. Even when closeness of the relationship was equated, people still preferred that their partners have affairs with non-relatives rather than relatives. So again, it would have been even more dramatic, the reveal that they had this affair. And
totally,
okay. Are we okay with this? What are some of the interesting or challenging moral issues raised in this film? Why don't you go first?
I mean, you're eventually just going to have to stop me because we don't want this to be a 9-hour episode. I think I was not okay with more of this movie than I was okay with.
Wow.
Let me just start with, I had a lot of issues with this movie. So, there's some of the terrible rom-com tropes. She slaps him in the face, right? Like you just see this so often that you end up tired of it. But there's also a really vivid example of no means yes.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you caught this, but Loretta's like, let me go home. And Ronnie's like, no. And Loretta says, let me go home. And Ronnie says, no. Yeah. And then he gives a long, totally unhinged speech. And then he says, come upstairs with me and get in my bed. And he's almost like Fat Bastard with the belly, right? Get in my bed. But then he's like, come on, come on, come on. Yeah. And what happens? She goes in, she sleeps with him, they get engaged.
Yeah.
And this message is
that's
not my most
great.
preferred.
That's not great.
Not great.
Yeah. Let's talk about the dating students. This one's fascinating on a number of levels. We're going back a solid 40 years. This was more common in the 1980s to openly date undergraduate students as a professor.
Yeah.
I like to think about the Overton window when you think about how norms have changed over time. So the Overton window basically means, look, at a given moment in time, there is a range of opinions or behaviors that are considered acceptable in public discourse.
Right.
And I think the fact that Perry is talking openly about the way that he dates students is meant to convey that at this time, that was sort of right smack dab in the middle of what was reasonable.
Yeah, it was like tacky.
Yeah,
it was like
right.
tacky as opposed to like a moral transgression.
Right. I think some people think professors still do this. I just want to jump in and say professors do not still do this, at least at major universities in the United States. We have rules against it. The rules commonly say that you cannot have any kind of sexual or romantic relationship with somebody that you supervise, have any kind of supervisory role, whether that's in your class, whether it's an advising kind of role. And in many universities, it's, if you might end up having some sort of advisory relationship with this person, it is banned. So it's a lot of, encouragement to wait till people graduate to start to have a relationship with them.
Yeah. And I think saying, it's not that this never happens. It's not that professors don't date students. It's not even that professors never date students in their own class. It's that, at least so far as I know, the latter, students that you supervise directly or in your class, is forbidden in basically every university, so far as I know, at least in the U.S. And if people do it, they're doing it on the sly and hoping they don't get caught.
Right.
They're not bragging about it in public.
Right. Now, to be clear, there were way worse things that professors did in the past that would have been more common in the 1980s. I read this biography of Henri Tajfel, who is a giant in the field of social psychology. And this biography kind of pulls no punches about the way that he pursued women, often like girlfriends of his students. He was inappropriately touching people all the time and, would kind of get talked to by a dean or a chair once in a while. But it was sort of commonly known and seemed like mostly shrugged off. So the Overton window has shifted a lot. And I think what we're seeing here would have been considered something like middle of the road and is now way out of bounds.
Yeah, it's outside the Overton window.
Yeah.
Totally. I also wanted to ask you, there is like a very stigmatized social identity, which is like the other woman or the mistress.
Yeah.
And I don't love the way that we...
great point.
Yeah, that we like dehumanize that character. I mean, so Mona...
Like, who is she? We know absolutely nothing about her. Absolutely
all we know
nothing.
Is that she spends a long time powdering her cleavage. And like... and like...
That is the most screen time she gets.
There was like this fawning part about like, oh, Cosmo, you're so great. So they... Obviously, this is a story about the Castorinis. And so they are not that invested in Mona. But I don't know. Mona has a life. My guess is that she has real feelings for Cosmo. And she's just dismissed. And I'm not saying every movie has to be about all of this, but I think because there's like a fallen woman or like immoral female archetype here, it's easy to disdain it, dehumanize it, forget about it. And I don't know how films like this should handle it, but I felt a little squeamish about the way Mona was treated.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a very good point. Let's move on to some quotes. I've got one I'd like to start with. I just thought that this was a very insightful take on the chance elements that bring people together. So this is a speech between Ronnie and Loretta, and Ronnie says,
You're gonna marry my brother. Why you wanna sell your life short? Playing it safe's just about the most dangerous thing a woman like you can do. I mean, you waited for the right man the first time. Why didn't you wait for the right man again?
Because he didn't come.
I'm here.
You're late.
So I like this idea that, hey, it can be the case that sometimes you agree to marry somebody and then it feels like you get hit with the bolt of lightning. That's one of the components of this movie that I rather like. And I like how she's so quick to come back with a, you're late.
You're late, yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's funny, 2 of the 3 that I had noted, you've already observed. So the snap out of it is totally classic. Yeah. And then this, like, why didn't you wait? He didn't come. I'm here. You're late is a great line. And the movie is, in a number of places, very funny and astute. And I don't know, like, we're probably not going to talk about that here, but this interesting question of, at some point in our lives, most of us will make a commitment and say, I'm going with this person. Yeah. We don't know whom we're going to meet. Yeah. It's one of the really complicated issues that come up. And I agree, we're not going to go into detail here, but it is an interesting thing. Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes, and I'll admit, I'm using this in part to sort of tweak the movie rather than because I think it's really an insightful comment, but the old guy, so Cosmo's dad, Grandpa Castorini, he's got his 5 dogs and he's hanging out with some people at a cemetery? I really don't know why. Yeah, right. He goes out for a walk with the dogs. They're all hanging out, and he says, La bella luna, right? And then he says, the moon brings the woman to the man. Capiche? Which, again, I kind of like. But I think the main reason I like it is because I think both of Loretta's romantic options are terrible. I think Johnny and Ronnie are both really bad options, and I think the film would have been better if they had been more appealing. Yeah. And so just
make them both more appealing, like just
both of them.
Yeah, right.
That's, again, we talked earlier, like, there's an interesting tension here, but it wasn't
People might be screaming into their microphones right now saying, like, you are missing the majesty that is Nicolas Cage. I'm just saying there's a possibility.
I want to remind everybody that I find him compelling too. But I'm glad you pushed me on this because I'd like to, provide a little bit of my argument here. So remember that the older brother, Johnny, isn't just kind of like practical and not very romantic. He's apparently like got a bunch of belly issues that are part of their relationship. But he can't keep track of his luggage. Like, I don't know why they had to make him such a buffoon. And then Ronnie is, I mean, I know that I have said like unhinged and lunatic and crazy, but I have way underestimated it. Like you know, early on it's like, they say life is bread, so I bake bread, and the years go by, and I shovel this stinking dough in and out of this hot hole in the wall. And look, I'm not even trying to do the accent, but he just goes on, and then he threatens suicide. Where's my Chrissy, over by the wall, give me my big knife. And he's just going to have some dramatic suicide here. Now, again, what actual transgression happened to him? Nothing. Like he had an accident at work. It was clearly upsetting, and he lives in this pool of grievance. And then later, again, I think he does this unethical stuff with Loretta. And when Loretta's like, "Look, I think like I feel guilty. You're guilty. We're both guilty." He says, "Look, only God can point the finger," which I admire as a general philosophy of not being a judgmental person, but as a like,
get out of jail free card.
Yeah. Exactly, as a get out of jail free, and so I look. The reason why I like this line from Grandpa Castorini is the moon brings the woman to the man is a more compelling explanation for why Loretta is interested in either of these men than I think the film offers us.
Is it weird that I'm kind of liking the movie more now after hearing you reenact it? Because now I can imagine why, 40 years ago, people enjoyed sitting around quoting this thing. It is very quotable.
It's quotable.
It is extremely silly. And yes, I don't know what's happening. And for a lot of the first, it's really, I think, the first act. It's very silly. It's very operatic. It's very over the top.
Wait,
I think
I'm not going to tolerate your like first act. Okay, how about later? Loretta, I love you. Not like they told you love is, and I didn't know this either, but love don't make things nice. It ruins everything. It breaks your heart. It makes things a mess. We're not here to make things perfect. Snowflakes are perfect. Stars are perfect, not us.
This is good. I like this.
Whatever definition of good you're using is something other than whatever this is.
Okay, all right. Let's go to what we wish we knew. I just had one small thing here, which is that I like Rose's idea that she's not going to have an affair because she has a sense of who she is. And, there's a lot of work on self-concept clarity and relationships. People who are avoidant tend to have lower self-concept clarity, but I didn't see anything specifically linking self-concept clarity to not getting involved in extramarital affairs or things like that. So I thought that was an interesting and quite plausible idea that Rose had there.
I agree. It harkens back a little bit to our discussion of, search for meaning, right? So Rose knows who she is. I think she thinks her life does have meaning, and therefore she's at less risk.
Yeah.
I find that totally credible.
Yep.
I had some little stuff here. I don't think we know as much as I thought we did about the power of romantic love. So when Ronnie says, "I can't believe this is happening, I was dead," and Loretta says, "I was dead too."
Yeah.
I really think that is what it feels like.
Yep.
It can be absolutely awakening. And I looked briefly and I didn't see much on that. I also think another thing that interested me is if we're going to endure an embarrassing or shaming experience, like if we're about to have an interaction and it's going to be uncomfortable and we're embarrassed of ourselves, do we want to do that in private or do we want loved ones around? And so you may know this. So this is again related to this sort of epic kitchen final scene where Johnny eventually he comes back and he says, "But I must talk to you alone," where he's about to say, "I need to break up with you." And Loretta says, "No, I need my family around me now."
Oh yeah.
And I find
that was neat.
It's interesting because on the one hand, you'd think, well, if I'm about to go through something really difficult, social support would be valuable. On the other hand, you might be like, if I'm about to have this really embarrassing thing where I need to confess that I just slept with my fiance's brother, would I want to do that in front of everybody? I don't think we know what sort of calculation people would make, and I find that intriguing.
No, that's a very thought-provoking line there, too. So on this podcast, we rate movies.
Oh, boy.
From 1 to 5 stars. I'm going to let you go first. How many stars do you give Moonstruck?
2.
Okay.
2 stars.
Okay. Some people just got very mad. But we gotta call him like we see him.
I don't know what to say. I recognize that this is a multiple Oscar-winning movie. I did try for the front half of the conversation today not to let this bleed into the discussion. I admire a lot of the movie, and Cher's performance is great. That kitchen table scene is impressive. There's something weirdly compelling about Mr. Cage. I, in general, found it ridiculous, and ultimately it impeded my ability to enjoy the movie very much.
Yeah. I think I'm at 4.
Nice. Well done.
It's a soft 4.
All right.
But it's so quotable and so ridiculous that
it's operatic.
Yeah, right.
It's like maybe the way to think about it. I've been trying. I've been trying to grade on a curve.
It's unusual in that way. Like most movies, at least that we cover, they're not operatic like this.
No. This is, I think why they mention La Boheme and the opera.
Yeah.
And I think it is meant to be larger than life. And I think Nick Cage's performance is deliberately larger than life. And that is, I do think there's a way to appreciate the movie on those grounds. I struggle to find it myself.
I get it. Well, on this podcast, we also rate these movies on Rust Bolts. Now, the Rust Bolt is named after Eli's advisor, the late, great Carol Rust Bolt, pioneer of close relationships research, with 5 stars indicating a near-perfect depiction of the nature of close relationships. I'm sorry, Moonstruck. I'm at 2 here. This is kind of a mess, and these ideas are all over the place. Oh, we pulled out some interesting things. There's some thought-provoking things, but no, it doesn't usually go like this according to the science. So what do you have here?
This movie's a fucking debacle. I have my first ever one Rust Belt movie. I do want to say
we did it.
Credit where it's due. Yeah, we achieved it. Credit where it's due. I do think there's some interesting stuff. I mentioned it at the top, especially that one sort of side scene where he says, you know, I see the girl I married, and that's a beautiful way to resolve the conflict. But most of the ideas in the movie are wrong, and they are so galactically, monumentally wrong and anti-correct, and that like this sort of affair just sort of like works out in the end, that over 36 hours of this sort of relationship, you might as well just get engaged and it's happily ever after. I find it, from a scientific perspective, harmful, and nobody should try to connect in this way. And holding the Nick Cage character up as like a romantic paragon, I think is dangerous.
Well, that was clear. And this has been the Love Actually podcast. I am Paul Eastwick. I have been here with Eli Finkel. And Eli, I look forward to doing this with you again next time.
I look forward to that too. I probably will like that movie more. The Love Factually podcast is produced and edited by Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel, featuring music from Andrew Fraker and Sons. Please reach out to us at lovefactuallypod@gmail.com. To learn more about the research we discussed in this episode, find the notes on our Substack. That's lovefactually.substack.com.